Welcome back to Innovation Nation, folks. Today we're going to be talking about something that we do every single day in our facilities, hot work. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the real cost of hot work. So, what am I talking about? What is hot work? Well, we're used to this. For my entire life, and I'm sure for all of you who are watching, hot work is a pretty standard practice in our day-to-day lives working in live plant facilities. It's the welding, it's the torch cutting, and it's the grinding that we need to do to make repairs, to get stuff done, to complete our work packages. These are all normal practices, right? We're used to this. For my life, and I'm sure for all of your lives, welding, grinding, and cutting are just part of the day-to-day activities and part of the safe work practices that we incorporate into how we do things every single day. They're just accepted things. They're just normal practices. They are part of our accepted safety practice to plan work with a hot work plan. Is it an automatic habit? Are we simply so used to having to weld, having to grind, or having to cut that we are not actually looking for the things that might be faster, safer, or more productive to do? Maybe we don't even know about new ways to do things, and that's perfectly okay. Hot work planning, approvals, and acceptance, doing all of those things, from a safety standpoint, are part of the hierarchy of controls. What is the hierarchy of controls? It is the level of controls that we put in place inside of our culture, inside of our policies, inside of our safety programs to decide how we are going to proceed to do work. On the very bottom of the hierarchy of controls is personal protective equipment. This is the last of the frontline protection for our people before they are faced with potential high risk. Safety boots, glasses, coveralls, face shields, earplugs, earmuffs, and lots of other personal protective equipment that comes into play as we plan the work that we do in the field. The next level of control are administrative controls. This is where a lot of hot work rests. It's the policies, the procedures, the approvals that are in place that allow us or don't allow us to proceed with work, and if we do proceed, telling us how we are going to do that work. Engineered controls, we see them every day. Often we're blind to them. It's the guard on a grinder. It is handrails and ladders. All of those physical barriers that we put between our people and the risks that are inherent to the workplace. Substitution, replacing the hazard with something else. And finally, the most effective level of control in the hierarchy of controls is elimination, to physically remove the hazard from existence. Where does hot work planning and approval rests? It's an administrative control. We have all the planning and risk mitigation and all the safety practices and permitting and testing that we put into place as standard practice to allow us to assess, mitigate the risk, and set approvals in place for the work to proceed or not to proceed. Is there a safer, more productive, and more cost-effective approach to hot work? Is there a higher level on the hierarchy of controls when we perform all of these types of tasks that are habit for us, that they're automatic? We just know that we need to do these things, and so hot work is the way it gets done. But is there a better way? Is there a way to get higher on the hierarchy of controls, to get to a place where we are eliminating the hazard, physically removing some of those elements that make it hot work in the first place? Let's talk about hot work for a little while. What are all of the costs of hot work? When I ask this question to many people, depending on their position and experience, they will often have a very different answer. They will talk about what it costs to perform the work in the field, the direct costs of hot work. But there are other costs that happen long before and some after when we look at performing hot work. What are they? Well, we know the direct costs, the people who are physically performing the task at hand in the field. But there are pre-work costs, all of the things that have to happen in the field before the hot work happens. There are indirect costs, all of the planning and administrative controls that have to take place and are a big part of how our hot work processes work. And there is always a safety risk and a potential safety cost when we perform hot work. Let's talk about direct costs for a minute. We all know the direct costs for when we execute hot work, right? The welder, the pipe fitters, the supervisor, the fire watch, gas detection, work permits, and potentially even additional members of the safety team in the field while that work is happening. What does that look like? Well, on a typical flange replacement job where we're cutting off a flange and we're having to re-weld, then that would take about 7 people or more. On a 10-hour shift, those 7 people would use up about 70 person hours. Now, I know this number is probably low for you and your site, but let's just say for argument's sake that the average cost per person, total cost, is about $100 an hour. That means the direct cost for doing that one shift with hot work is at least $7,000. What happens before we get there? What happens before we get to that flange to do that cutting, fitting, and welding? What happens indirectly? The pre-work costs. Well, pre-work are all the things we do to try to mitigate some of those risks. The blanking and the blinding, the purging of that line, lockout and tagout, additional hot work training, and even hot work permit receiver training for some of the people involved. These are all these pre-work costs to position you to get ready to do the work in the field. Pre-work costs are often thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars more, or in addition to the direct costs. And so your complete job at this point, instead of $7,000, might be $14,000. It might even be $24,000 or larger in getting ready to perform that hot work activity. What about indirect costs? Long before you put in blanks and blinds and you purge the system, long before you are locking out and tagging out the system, there's a whole other series of these administrative controls on the hierarchy of controls that have to take place to decide if the hot work can proceed. That's the planning and the risk mitigation, the approvals, and the approval rejections. Here is a typical hot work planning and approval process from one of our clients. Someone in the field is identifying the scope and puts in a requisition of some sort for the work to be planned. Planning, maintenance planners are developing the work package. Then you get into risk review and mitigation. Safety, engineering, and the planning team are reviewing the plan to review and to reduce additional risks. Then you get into hazard assessment meetings and process. At that point, you take all of those people, safety, engineering, and planning, and now you're likely bringing in several of the execution personnel who are going to be involved in the pre-work and in the direct hot work activities to do hazard identification and strategies to limit. At that point, you have a hot work plan in place and you go for approval. And the approval for hot work, particularly in a live plant, normally takes several signatures, and the last signature being a manager, general manager, a director, or depending on your site, possibly even a company level vice president. Now, when you think about that, the planning and approval is dozens, but likely hundreds of person hours, and it's normally an X multiple of the direct cost to do the work. The planning and approval process is almost always more expensive, and more timely than it is to perform the task at hand. We have two stories from two clients about hot work. We have one client that has a 95% rejection rate on the hot work plans that are presented to their vice president. What that means is that every hot work plan costs 20 times what you think it costs. If only 1 in 20 are approved, all of the costs for all 20 get wrapped up into that one approval, whether you code it on the accounting books that way or not. If you have a 1 in 20 approval, then all of the costs get wrapped up into that 1 out of 20 job. We have another client, because of their processes and the inherent risk of hot work, they have a no hot work plant policy, and they have another series of costs because their risk is in piling up the work onto a shutdown and the loss of production from not being able to do all of these repairs while the facility is running. So the real cost of hot work, when you think about a simple flange replacement, are likely 10 times what it costs to actually physically go out into the field with that 7-person crew and cut and weld that flange. For an above ground storage tank that must be shut down, it's likely millions of times more in terms of cost than the physical repairing of a patch or to attach a ladder bracket. And if you have to shut down the entire facility, the cost of that is likely tens of thousands of times more than the physical direct cost if you could do the hot work during regular operations. So what normally happens when a live plant hot work is not approved, it's not permitted to be performed? Well, pretty simply, that work has to be packed into the planned or unplanned shutdowns, and the result, in addition to all the costs of the shutdown, is a loss of production. But there's a risk that there's too much activity packed into the turnaround, and during the turnaround planning process, all of a sudden, much needed other activities might need to be dropped off the turnaround plan because of these hot work activities that get added into the plan over the course of the year or 2 years, depending on your turnaround intervals. Shutdowns and losses of production are millions of dollars. They are months in lost production, and combined are tens of millions in costs and lost revenue for the facility owner. And they are definitely a needed activity. But what if you could remove much of the scope by not packing it into the turnaround and also not having to do it as hot work? Let's talk about the fourth cost of hot work, the safety costs of hot work, specifically the safety cost when hot work goes wrong. The Chemical Safety Board is an organization that investigates hot work incidents across Canada and the United States. Between 1990 and 2010, they conducted dozens of hot work incidents. In that bundle, there were more than 60 deaths and many, many more life-changing injuries as a result of hot work gone wrong. There were also tens of billions of dollars in capital facility losses, including some complete facility losses. Let's have a listen to what the Chemical Safety Board has to say about hot work and their recommendations.
In 1979, 20-year-old John Capana was a contract worker performing maintenance at a New Jersey refinery.
We actually had pulled out of the refinery and were called back in to do one last job, which was to demolish an old pumping station. We were told that it was a water pumping station. It was not a water line, it was a crude oil line, in fact. We tried to dismantle the pump, starting with removing the bolts from the flanges, and they were so corroded that we couldn't get them loose by conventional means, so we elected to use an acetylene torch at that point. As soon as the flange separated, it exploded. I was burned over 90% of my body.
30 years and over 75 surgeries later, Mr. Capanna now assists other burn survivors as they recover from their wounds, often suffered on the job.
Don't think that something this tragic couldn't happen to you or somebody you love. This could happen to anybody.
John Capanna's life was changed forever by a hot work accident. Welding, cutting, grinding, seemingly a routine operation, until suddenly flammable vapors are ignited by sparks or heat.
We typically hear about hot work accidents weekly. It's become one of the most significant types of incidents the CSB investigates in terms of deaths, in terms of frequency.
The Chemical Safety Board found that since 1990, welding, cutting, and other hot work on or near flammable storage tanks caused fires and explosions that led to over 60 deaths. In February 2010, the CSB issued a safety bulletin outlining 7 key lessons to prevent hot work accidents. The bulletin followed a tragic explosion that killed 3 paper mill workers in Wisconsin in July 2008, together with 10 other serious hot work accidents investigated or reviewed by the CSB. Whenever possible, avoid hot work or consider alternative methods, such as cold or hydraulic cutting.
Although the hazards of hot work are well known, frequent deaths and serious injuries continue to occur. The CSB believes that following the key lessons outlined here can help prevent future hot work-related accidents.
The Chemical Safety Board's #1 recommendation is to avoid or eliminate hot work whenever possible. In the next series of videos, we're going to share with you 4 ways that you can do just that. Eliminating and avoiding hot work and still get the work done. These 4 ways of eliminating hot work will allow you to climb the hierarchy of controls from administrative controls all the way up to eliminating, physically removing the risk by eliminating the source of ignition. Till next time, folks, thank you for watching Innovation Nation and have a great and safe day. Bye for now.